For 30 years, a crime family controlled an entire region's drug trade, labor unions, and political appointments. They were never photographed together, never recorded, never caught in a room where decisions were made. Police knew their names. Prosecutors knew what they did. But proving it was impossible, because they had built something most criminal organizations never achieve, a system that functioned without them being present. When the arrests finally came in 1998, investigators discovered something unsettling. Removing the leadership didn't collapse the organization. It barely slowed it down. In the early 1970s, the Caruana family didn't look like what most people imagine when they think of organized crime. They weren't flamboyant. They didn't operate nightclubs or own flashy restaurants. They didn't make public displays of wealth or power. They were quiet, methodical, and they understood something that most criminal organizations never grasp. Visibility is a liability. The family had roots in Siciliana, a small town in Sicily. Like many Sicilian families in the post-war era, they were connected to traditional mafia structures. But the younger generation, particularly Alfonso Caruana and his brothers, saw the limitations of the old model. Traditional mafia families operated territorially. They controlled neighborhoods, cities, regions. They enforced that control through violence and intimidation. Everyone knew who was in charge. That was the point. But territorial control creates friction. Rival families. Law enforcement focus. Constant violence that attracts attention. The Caruana family asked a different question. What if power didn't require presence? In 1974, Alfonso Caruana left Sicily. Not fleeing. Relocating. He went to Venezuela first. Then Brazil. Then Canada. His brothers and cousins spread across 3 continents, establishing themselves in cities that seemed to have no connection to each other. To outside observers, it looked like a diaspora, a family scattering to find opportunity. But it was architectural planning. Each location served a specific function in what would become a global network. Venezuela provided access to Colombian cocaine suppliers. Brazil offered banking secrecy and proximity to South American production. Montreal became the refinement and distribution hub for North American markets. And here's the critical part. Each node in the network operated independently. A cocaine shipment moved from Colombia to Venezuela. Different people handled it there. It moved to Canada. Different people again. It was distributed in the United States. Another set of operators. At no point did any single person in the chain have visibility into the entire operation. This wasn't just compartmentalization. It was modular design. Think about how most criminal organizations structure themselves. There's a boss at the top, underbosses below, soldiers at the bottom. Information flows up through the hierarchy. Orders flow down. This creates efficiency, but it also creates vulnerability. Flip someone in the middle, and they can testify about everyone above and below them. The Caruana model eliminated that vulnerability by eliminating the hierarchy. Instead of a pyramid, they built a network of parallel cells. Each cell had a specific function. Each cell knew only what it needed to know to perform that function. The genius was in how they connected these cells without creating traceable links. By the early 1980s, the Caruana family was moving an estimated $200 million a year. That's what investigators would later piece together. Nobody outside the family could describe exactly how it worked. Law enforcement tried. They tried to draw charts, to name leaders, to follow the threads. But there was no structure in any traditional sense. No pyramid. No chain of command. Nothing familiar to the investigators. What investigators eventually started calling the protocol was something altogether different. It wasn't a hierarchy. It wasn't a set of orders. It was a system, a rhythm, a way of moving information and making decisions that left almost no trace. The first rule was simple. Never use the phone to speak of anything important. It sounds obvious now. But back then, most criminals believed they could speak in code and avoid detection. They assumed cleverness was protection. The Caruana family assumed the opposite. They assumed every line, every connection, every conversation could be intercepted. So they didn't call. Not for anything real. How do you run a multinational criminal operation without talking to anyone over the phone? The answer was meetings. Face to face. But never in private offices, never in homes, never anywhere that could be watched. They met in public spaces. Parks, markets, streets crowded with ordinary people. Places where microphones would pick up too much background noise, and where following someone through a crowd was nearly impossible. This gave rise to what investigators later called the walk. When a decision needed to be made, two people would meet at a predetermined location. They would walk together for exactly 15 minutes. No more, no less. During those 15 minutes, they would talk. About shipments, about problems, about opportunities. But nothing would be written down. Nothing repeated. No one would ever confirm it later. After 15 minutes, they would separate and return to their normal lives. The decision would have been made. That was it. From there, the information propagated through a chain of intermediaries who never met each other and often didn't even know they were part of the same operation. The associate, often a legitimate businessman with no criminal record, would then contact a shipping company and arrange transport for what looked like a perfectly legal commercial shipment. Agricultural products, machinery, whatever cover story was necessary. Everything had proper documentation. Licenses, customs forms, manifests. Everything above board. Meanwhile, in Venezuela, a completely different associate, someone who had never met the Montreal contact, would prepare the cargo. The cocaine was hidden in legitimate goods using methods that evolved constantly. False-bottomed containers, chemical masking, concealment inside machinery. That Venezuelan associate didn't know where the shipment was going or who would receive it. He only knew to prepare the cargo and deliver it to the shipping company on a specific date. In Canada, yet another associate would receive the shipment. They didn't know where it had come from. They didn't know who sent it. They simply knew to receive it, store it, and wait for instructions. At no point did any one person have enough information to compromise the entire operation. If the Montreal contact were arrested, he could only testify that he arranged shipping for a friend. Nothing illegal in his involvement. The Venezuelan associate? Same story. The Canadian receiver? Same again. This was what frustrated investigators the most. They could intercept shipments, arrest individuals, but those arrests never led anywhere. The system was designed to be prosecution-proof. Moving drugs, however, was only half the challenge. Money was the other half. Millions in cash from street-level sales. How do you move it without leaving a trace? This was where the family's ingenuity became clear. They didn't rely on casinos, car washes, or businesses with inflated revenue. Those methods work for smaller operations, but, at this scale, they create statistical anomalies that banking regulators notice. Instead, they used a method known as the black market peso exchange. The way it worked was almost elegant. Drug proceeds in the United States, cash from street sales, needed to get back to Colombia to pay suppliers. Normally, that would mean physically transporting cash across borders or wiring it through banks. Both carried risk. The black market peso exchange sidestepped that risk by matching two separate needs. Colombian businesses needed US dollars to import American goods, but currency controls made it hard to get dollars legally. At the same time, drug cartels had millions of dollars in cash they needed to convert to pesos. The family became the middleman. They collected US cash from drug sales, used it to buy goods that Colombian businesses wanted to import: electronics, machinery, consumer products. The goods were shipped to Colombia and sold. The proceeds, now in pesos, went to the cartels. Everyone got what they needed, and the family took a cut. Every step of the process appeared legitimate. The cash used? From normal retail businesses. The goods shipped? Proper export documentation. The sales in Colombia? Standard commercial transactions. To any regulator looking at the paper trail, nothing unusual appeared, just ordinary international trade. By the late 1980s, law enforcement agencies across several countries knew something massive was happening. Cocaine was flooding North America and Europe. Money moved in patterns that didn't match any known criminal organization. But every investigation ran into the same wall. They could see the effects, but never the structure.